Hello, everybody. We are going to get started with our third in our federal focus webinar series. Like many of you around the nation, Maine Audubon is concerned with actions taken by Congress and the federal government to weaken the environmental rules that we rely on to protect Maine wildlife and habitat. One of those rules is our focus today, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Passed in 1918, the MBTA, as it's known, is one of the oldest wildlife protection laws in the nation and is credited with saving the lives of millions or perhaps billions of birds. The act provides that it is unlawful to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, possess, sell, purchase, barter, import, export, or transport any migratory bird or any part or nest or egg of such bird unless specially authorized. This is a bill that covers an act that covers more than 1,000 species of birds found in North America, Japan, and Russia. It's a major success. It's a cornerstone of our environmental work. But despite its success and its history, there are those working to challenge and undermine this act. Here to talk about it is one of my good friends, Erik Schneider. Erik and I knew each other from back in the good old days where we were young. We had no gray hair, any of this. This was all new. He dyes his gray just to make me feel better. I do know that. We were officers together on what became, here's Jesse, what became the DC Bird Alliance. Hello, Jesse. And we're also joined by, Erik Schneider is policy manager with the National Audubon Society. And we're also joined by Jesse Walls, a senior director for government affairs at the National Audubon Society. Let me just say quickly, one quick thing, Maine Audubon and the National Audubon Society are two very separate, completely separate organizations. We do a lot of the same work. We protect birds and habitat, but we are not affiliated, even though we do share a name. We work together very closely, but we're separate organizations, just so folks know. It's a very confusing topic. And we're really honored to be joined by these two gentlemen working on the absolute front lines of bird protection. And I'll share a quick story. I already shared my background story with Erik. We were friends and compatriots for a while. This past week, I had the honor of being in Washington, D.C. I was on a fly-in with another partner organization, the American Bird Conservancy, coming in to talk to Maine's congressional delegation and some others in our group about bird protection. And one of the events for that night included a sort of gathering at a local bar of all kinds of bird protection folks from around the sort of environmental sphere. Jesse was there, and some of his colleagues at National Audubon Society was there. And let me tell you, friends, attendees, this is where the good stuff happens, right? It was really fun to be in this packed bar full of people talking about, you bounce from one conversation to another, and they'd be saying, here's how we're protecting these are just conversations about strategizing to protect lesser prairie chicken, marbled murrelet, some subspecies of turkey I'd never even heard of, all kinds of birds. These are the people who are working to protect our birds. They are on the front lines trying to figure it all out. Not easy in 2025, let me tell you, and Jesse may chime in later on with that. So anyway, you're in the company of some folks who are doing the work. These are two folks who are here making sure that birds are protected, and we want to talk to you some more about it. So without further ado, I would love to turn it over to Erik, who will get started with a presentation about the MBTA. Finally, this is being recorded. We will send this around to all registrants later on. Q&A is down below. So if you look on the lower part of your bar there, there's a Q&A box. We'll save questions to the end. Erik will turn it over to Jesse after his presentation, and then we'll take questions at the end. So put those in there and we'll save them. And that's all. Without further ado, Erik, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Nick. I'm going to share my screen here. Just 1 second. All right, all looking good?
Looking good.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Nick. It's great to be with you all today. Great to see you. It's it's been a pleasure to work with you and for us to work with Maine Audubon for such a long time, and it goes back this like century, right? This has been a long history of partnerships, and I think a lot of that connects right into the topic of today, going back to how this all got started with trying to get real protections for birds in place, recognizing the real challenges that were happening a century ago and the real challenges we're having today, right? So we've made a lot of progress over the century, but new issues have emerged, new challenges have emerged, and this is, I think, a really timely topic to be able to talk about today. So I was actually just thinking about this the other day, watching Senator Cory Booker's inspiring speech in Congress, and there was a sort of a viral post going around on social media about which was, what would you talk about for 19 hours? And for me, it's definitely the MBTA. This is the thing that's like, I'm just very passionate about. I've had the pleasure of working on for over a decade now, and it's such an important and fascinating issue in history. And again, I think, unfortunately, because of some continuing risks, it is once again very timely. But I think it's great to just have folks' interest here, and looking forward to just diving in a bit more. So I will, just as an overview, start with some of the history. Some of this may be familiar to folks, but at least a refresher, and maybe some new context and background for others, and then talk a little bit more about the law, why it matters, and dive into some of the recent controversies over the law, and finally what we can all do to help protect this law that protects our birds. So I know it's a bit of a heavy topic, just a lot going on in the world, and we'll try to brighten things up with a little bit, at least with some beautiful bird pics, and hopefully some hopefulness at the end about what we can do to help. So with that, I will start with some more of the background in the history of the MBTA. So as some may know, right, we're going back over 100 years, right? Late 1800s, bird populations were in free fall, right? So you had these, particularly at the time, these dual threats of one, market hunting, so mass killing of birds to sell at markets, right, for food, feathers, vast collection of eggs. You had this growing plume trade, as it's called, right, for collecting birds' feathers for fashion, the trend of the time for some reason. So just the numbers were startling, right? Just like you hear about just the thousands and thousands of like robins and stuff that were just at the markets, and seabirds and shorebirds. Vast flocks of some of our most common birds were just disappearing, right? Passenger pigeons, Carolina parakeets and others. And so, this was a really primarily a commercial driven threat. It's not just about kind of individual people, but this like exploitation of birds for profit essentially is what was driving this threat. And so people started paying attention, right? So people were seeing, with their own eyes, this disappearance of, just years before, what had been previous abundance has been, disappearing. And so the first folks got together. The first formation of the Audubon Society, formed by George Burbanell in 1886, that kind of kicked things off. Didn't fully pan out, but it ended up inspiring a number of folks around the country to form this local Audubon societies, right? So the Massachusetts Audubon Society in 1896. 15 other chapters, local and state level, a few years after that. Maine Audubon, right, in 1902. And National Audubon, which was the National Association of Audubon Societies, in 1905, to try to organize this growing effort and attention and interest in bird conservation, and really was focused on how do we get bird protections, right? There was just no regulations, no real environmental laws, And Maine was really at center of this too. Just looking back again at some of the history, Maine was considered one of the most kind of trouble spots, one of the most important areas, especially around seabirds, right? And so across the Atlantic coast, gulls and terns, especially, were just getting wiped out. There was almost no nesting gulls and terns left in the Atlantic coast. So hard to imagine now, just like just seeing them everywhere right now, and you can't imagine what it would be like to not have these birds on our coast. But there was a real danger of that happening, and a lot of these birds have retreated to sort of a stronghold on the islands of Maine. And so William Dutcher, who became the first president of National Audubon Society, came to Maine. He helped establish these wardens, like working with lighthouse keepers, and some may know this, but it's a really amazing history of just this perseverance, working at these individual places to save these birds. But I think they also recognize that was never going to be enough, right? You can't just rely on these individual people trying to save birds like one at a time. You have to have the government stepping in to protect birds. And the first way they did that was by looking at the state level, right? And so William Dutcher and other conservationists worked in Maine, and they started working at the state legislature, lobbying the state legislature. There was something called the model law, which was a model legislation to protect birds state by state. And and they succeeded in doing that in Maine. And in 1901, we were able to pass that, and several other states followed. But that was a really important step in progress in bird protections, but it was never going to be enough just to have state protections too, right? And so migratory birds, if you want to be able to successfully conserve them, you can't ultimately succeed if you just have a patchwork of states, because birds are flying into other states that didn't have protections, getting wiped out. You need to have a nationwide and really international system of protections if we're going to actually save these birds from extinction and recover their populations. And so that really sparked this nationwide campaign. And that led in 1913 with just tremendous effort of the Audubon societies and conservationists and partners to pass the first version of this. It's called the Weeks Within Act. There was a lot of fighting about, federal authorities versus state authorities, the same exact debate we have in Congress now. How much authority does the federal government have to manage wildlife in a state? A lot of sort of states' rights folks were very concerned about that. There were big challenges to that law, and that sparked this idea and need to work at international level through the treaty process, right? So you had the negotiation between the U.S. and Great Britain, representing Canada, to develop the Migratory Bird Treaty in 1916, which created this federal nexus, this strong basis of federal authority to be able to manage migratory birds. And that led off with this then 2-year campaign to pass the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Really amazing, just sort of perseverance, dedication that the folks, the Audubon societies, sportsmen as well were very engaged. And this is just some snippets from the Bird Lore magazine at the time, kind of celebrating the passage of the treaty and updating folks on the Migratory Bird Treaty Bill, which they called the Enabling Act also at the time. And they were able to galvanize the public, and this was like coming out of World War I, and faced a lot of challenges again, right? A lot of pushback, but they were able to create this whole campaign and tap into public interest and public support. Same way we do now, right? With action alerts, they were doing all these handwritten letters and telegrams, reaching out to Congress. People were weighing in and just putting this on the radar of Congress, and we're able to succeed. And this is, I think, this is one of the telegrams able to find, for the Western Union telegram from a Missouri resident back in 1918. And Missouri was actually kind of the center of this fight, because there was this really strong kind of hunting club community who they really wanted to shoot the ducks, especially in the spring. This was a big fight around the MBTA, like spring shooting. And so you had folks weighing in to say, like, look, I live in Missouri. I don't want to see this. Like, we don't want these town dudes coming in and shooting all of our ducks. And he would be mighty thankful if he would help out with this treaty. And ultimately that helped convince folks. So this wasn't the end of it, right? There was a Supreme Court case, this really landmark case a couple of years later about Missouri versus Holland, which was based on the fight happening in Missouri, and led to this landmark ruling and this kind of iconic quote, which is still pretty infamous today, about the ruling which upheld the constitutionality of the MBTA and the treaty. In part because of this federal authority through the treaty power, which still resonates today. But this line, the national interest of very nearly the first magnitude, but for the treaty and statute, there soon might be no birds for any powers to deal with. Right. So this is really powerful ruling from Oliver Wendell Holmes, and set the stage for the durability of the MBTA, which we're still trying to make sure we can fight and protect today. So to get a little bit more in detail, and Nick previewed this in the introduction, this is what is the MBTA? Basically, this is really the meat of it here. It's in what we call Title 16 of the US Code, Section 703. This is really everything here, because the MBTA is really about protecting birds from human-caused mortality. Right, this is a piece of conservation. It's a really, really important one, and has provided a lot of success for bird conservation, and for all of us that benefit and benefit from and enjoy birds. Right. Again, it's not the only one, but this is really the key provision. And as Nick said, it shall be unlawful, right, unless and except as permitted by regulations at any time, by any means, or in any manner, to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, sell, purchase, etc., any migratory bird, any part, nest, or egg of any such bird. Really, really strong language. Has a very broad brush. This has been this really key sort of signal, right, that's been sent for 100 years that migratory birds are protected from take and kill, right, or being killed. So as this is what was considered a strict liability statute, you don't have to be able to, you never had needed to show intent unless there was an amendment later about, for felonies. But there's nothing in here that says, it has to be from a certain type of impact, or you have to be able to, show that you intended to, take or kill a bird. This is just very broad, strict statute. As I said, protects over 1,000 species, right? So this is basically all of our native birds. Just a few exceptions, which I'll note, but now just for some lovely bird photos. It protects like all of our songbirds, right? Baltimore Orioles, really all of our songbirds, except for a few of the non-native species, like house sparrows, European starlings, those types. Our wading birds, great egrets, the icon of National Audubon Society, tying back to the passage of the MBTA. Snowy egrets, again, like really hunted for these amazing plumes at the time. Sandhill cranes, a species that was really on the brink more than 100 years ago, helped come back from the MBTA. And other wading birds like great blue herons, waterfowl, right? Wood duck, arguably the best duck. I don't know. I think it's up there. So the waterfowl have been really under a ton of pressure, and now thanks to the regulations, right, you've got this whole basically permit system through hunting, which has helped save these beautiful species like the wood duck, iconic species like the common loon, right? All of our raptors, were added actually a little bit later, but red-tailed hawks and other raptors, and then our shorebirds too. So this is, we're talking about basically all of our native species except for, again, the ones I mentioned, non-native species, and then some of the upland hunted species. So some of the species like quail, turkey, grouse, some of those, that was kind of a something that came out of those negotiations at the time. But other than that, right, more than 1,000 species. So this was, again, I think just really critical for helping turn a lot of these species around. It helped pretty quickly, folks are recognizing and seeing these impacts on the ground. A lot of these species starting to recover pretty soon. They realized, really, we can't just do this, we have to look at habitat too. So that led to kind of a growth of habitat policy measures. A lot of other environmental laws came out of this period in the decades after MBTA. But I think as those years progressed and some of this progress is being made, the federal agencies and conservationists are realizing, right, it's not just sort of unlawful shooting and poaching, right, hunting and poaching that are the only threats to birds, right? So those are real ones, and they still do exist today to some extent, right? But in the 20th century, with rapid industrialization, with new human-caused impacts to birds happening across the country, we're starting to see real harm being done and real preventable mortality that was being out on the landscape. So you had this proliferation of pollution and toxins and infrastructure and all these things sprouting right all across the country, and those things were killing birds too, right? And so the MBTA, really in the sort of 60s and 70s, at least since the Nixon administration, started to become a very important tool for addressing these other sources of human-caused mortality. Oil pits. So like you see here, these just awful, mixes of oil and water, just carelessly, left across the West, especially. They're starting to find like millions of birds being caught in these oil pits. And so this was one of the first tools that for sort of industrial caused mortality, the MBTA was being applied to. This gets into the kind of main controversy and topic which I'm going to be focusing on, which is, again, industrial caused impacts to birds in the MBTA. And the technical term used for this is called incidental take, right? So if a bird lands in an oil pit like this, the company wasn't just trying to kill a bird, right? Like a hunting or a poaching situation, but they are responsible for it and they can prevent it from happening. But it's considered incidental to that activity. Right, it's not the best term, it's the sort of technical term, so I will use that term a bit here, but we're really talking about industrial caused impacts. And so, estimates at the time for these oil pits, like 1 to 2 million birds a year, waterfowl, but not just waterfowl, wading birds, songbirds, raptors, all getting caught up in these pits. And the enforcement that happened on the MBTA going back to the 70s was successful. It helped lead to new practices, new code of guidance, and changed a lot of the way that these were being done. And so the estimates actually fell by half in years later because of, we think because of the way that the MBTA was enforced. So millions of birds were saved because of this. Here's just a sort of a tough photo, but this is just kind of what they were seeing. It's important to kind of recognize what this really looked like. And so this is where there's another sort of tough photo to see in this next slide, but power lines were another focus early on for the MBTA. Again, this is what we consider sort of incidental take, but millions and millions of birds are impacted by power lines. And so that includes both electrocution, like we see on the left, with, raptors are particularly vulnerable to that, and then collisions. And that's a big threat to especially larger waterfowl like swans and cranes. And so again, this is human caused mortality that can be prevented. And the Fish and Wildlife Service really depended on the MBTA and still has right to this day. Then we'll get into some of the challenges to reduce these impacts. And it led to changes in the way that power lines were designed and new recommendations from stakeholder groups that got together to say, like, look, we recognize the problem. Power lines are starting to be enforced against with the MBTA, and both their electrocutions and collisions. And here's what you can do to prevent that. So that sparked, and still does spark a lot of this action. Again, same with collisions. You can put these markers, right? Some folks may see you've got these markers on these power lines, which helps birds see the power lines, pilots too. And this was really the big motivator for starting to take action to save birds. And there's been a lot of really important success and progress made because of that. Oil spills are another one where the MBTA has been a really important tool, right? So our two of the biggest oil spills, right, in our history, Deepwater Horizon here and then Exxon Valdez. The MBTA was a really critical part of the settlements and the prosecutions in those cases. Right, so Deepwater Horizon, BP ended up having to pay $100 million MBTA fine because of the birds that their negligence caused, right? And so one thing I want to note is that, as a bit of an aside, but sometimes incidental take, it's equated with accidental take, right? Like it's just, oh, it's an accident. So why are you punishing people for an accident? Well, this isn't the way that the MBTA has been implemented, right? It's not about punishing accidents. It's really about accountability for negligence, right? And so if something's really avoidable and you know that you can take an action to prevent it, it's not really an accident at that point, right? That's on you. That's you have the responsibility to correct that. And if you don't, then the Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Justice will take action on that. I think as they should do. And so again, Deepwater Horizon, in the case of gross negligence, $100 million fine that went right into the program for the North American Wetlands Conservation Act. So that had a really beneficial impact. Hundreds of thousands of acres benefited from the Gulf all the way up to prairie potholes in Canada across the flyway for these species that were impacted. Couldn't have happened if we didn't have this key authority through this incidental take protections. Exxon Valdez, another one where MBTA was a critical part of helping be able to recover for those species that were impacted by the spill. So really important tool. And, again, just another tough photo to see here, but this is what we're trying to prevent, right? This is what we need to recover from. We need the MBTA, and we, shouldn't allow companies to be able to get away from, get out of doing this. We shouldn't be giving them a free pass to impact birds like this, right? And so, last thing I just want to mention here in terms of how the MBTA has been applied, it's been an increasingly important tool on helping make sure that we can build clean energy in a responsible way, right? So there have been a handful of cases where, I think thanks to the MBTA, there has been guidelines that have developed, wind energy guidelines that provide some practices to be able to reduce impacts on birds. In those cases where companies decided to ignore those guidelines or ignore the Fish and Wildlife Service, and it led to, right, again, avoidable mortality on birds, there have been a few cases of enforcement, and that has led to, again, some innovations, innovative practices that have come out. This photo on the right shows this technology called Identiflight, which was installed following some enforcement actions, which helps identify birds coming into the project area, and then can actually lead to turning off those turbines as they get closer, right? So there's been some promising results on that. So that's been, another angle in recent years, for helping make sure we can, again, minimize our impacts, on birds. So again, just to recap a few key things here. This is really important incentive, right? Proactive actions, sending a signal that companies need to avoid and minimize their impacts on birds, accountability, and then helping recover from these impacts after they occur. Right. So this is really what we're trying to make sure we can prevent and continue. Right. So and as we know, right, the birds are still facing challenges. The new 2025 State of the Birds report shows that, and for a lot of our bird populations, we are seeing continuing declines, building off that landmark 2019 report, showing a loss of 3 billion birds. So many of these populations losses are continuing. So, we now only need to make sure we're upholding what we currently have, right? We have to do more. We have to be better, and we need to improve the way we do bird protection, bird conservation. The last thing we need is, losing some of those protections. So it continues to be extremely important, and we also know exactly what types of birds are in particular trouble, and so we can help focus our efforts from this kind of science. So I'm going to just run through some of the administrative actions and changes we've seen in recent years. So there's really been this 10-year period where this kind of controversy around, again, so-called incidental take has really blown up. And that started actually going back to the end of the Obama administration, when they were starting to consider ways that we could improve the MBTA and try to just resolve this incidental take issue. One way they were considering doing that is something that we've really supported, is by developing an incidental take permit. So all of our other environmental laws, wildlife laws like Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, they have an opportunity to be able to provide regulatory certainty at the same time that we are conserving and protecting birds. And the way you do that is through a permit. Right. So that process, though, did not get finalized. They did put out this kind of legal opinion policy at the end of the Obama term, which when the Trump administration came in 2017, they just dispensed with that, unfortunately, and then put out their own legal opinion in 2017. And they took a position for the first time, in our history, that incidental take was not a violation of the MBTA, right? So this just all of a sudden just ripped out protections that have been in place for 50 plus years, putting all of our birds at greater risk. This was, really devastating, and, led to this massive campaign that, that Audubon and partners worked on throughout the Trump administration. And Audubon went to court with partners and several states as well, and ended up winning in court with this really incredible ruling in Southern District of New York, with this, again, kind of iconic quote from the judge, who said, "It is not only a sin to kill a mockingbird, it is also a crime." And so the judge found that this policy, this legal opinion, was unlawful and vacated it, right? So overturned this policy. Fortunately, it didn't stop the Trump administration from moving forward. They ended up putting out a rule, so a regulation that codified this policy into the MBTA rules in their final days of the administration. So that was quite unfortunate. Again, that was an escalation rather than just listening to the courts on this sort of a pattern. But the Biden administration then came in and took some other actions. So just want to note before getting into that throughout this process, there was this, again, huge public pushback. Hundreds of organizations, had weighed in. Hundreds of thousands of letters were sent. More than half of the states in the country weighed in against this. Dozens of tribes were opposed. These senior officials from Republican, Democratic administrations. Canada was very unhappy about this and what that meant for our treaty, and lots of members of Congress too. So just to note that, this really did have a lot of public pushback, and some of the folks may have been engaged in some of this on the webinar here today. So, we're just really grateful for the public weighing in at the time, and I think we're going to have to, call on folks again to be able to do that potentially in the weeks and months and years ahead. So, just want to note, so, a couple updates from the Biden administration on where we're at today. So, Biden administration came in, I think all that public support allowed them to quickly move to reverse what the Trump administration had done. So they got rid of that legal opinion memo, following the court order, and then rescinded the Trump administration's rulemaking, which was great. And then they, again, like the Obama administration, considered a process to develop a permit, which we strongly supported and pushed forward, but we pushed for. Fortunately, that again did not make it across the finish line. And so we ended up kind of with the status quo with at least protections back in place, which is a really important win. But again, not taking that next step, which we think is important for the durability of the law. So when the Trump administration, part two came in, we've seen two steps taken so far. One is to kind of reverse to get rid of those Biden administration memos and policies that they put in place. They have not yet said that incidental take is no longer prohibited. So they haven't come out and done what they did the last time around yet. That's like the next shoe that could drop. Again, we very much hope that they don't go down that road, but we are preparing for that possibility. So, keep an eye on it. That's going to be the really key step if they decide to go that route, is coming out with some kind of announcement. It could be another legal opinion, could be a rulemaking. So they have not done that yet, but it's it's quite possible that they may decide to go down that route again. Ultimately, the durability for the MBTA and these protections is going to have to come from Congress. On the flip side, there is a threat, like the Congress could take actions to try to do what the Trump administration did, and we've seen some of those happen in years past, fortunately not recently. But again, we're always on the lookout for that possibility. So the defense is really critical here, because that's the inverse of it, right? If they pass something in Congress bad, then that's very hard to reverse. But what we want to see, and what we've been working on, with Congress for years, is to develop and advance legislation that would provide durability and reinforce protections in the law, right? So we don't have this back and forth between Republican and Democrat administrations, we've seen in recent years, and try to prevent these kinds of attacks from happening in the future, or, the courts potentially getting a hold of it and trying to go at it that way. So for the past about 7 years or so, there's been a law called the Migratory Bird Protection Act. And this is, again, a measure to try to strengthen the MBTA, strengthen these provisions, and at the same time, improve the way that we implement the MBTA. So there's been, good amount of support that's come out. We've had like about 100 or so co-sponsors in sessions past. Did move through the House Natural Resources Committee several years ago, which was a great, win and great progress. We have not seen a bill introduced yet this session, but we're expecting it to be introduced pretty soon, probably in the coming weeks. And Congressman Huffman has taken the lead on this from California, along with Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania. And so we're very much looking forward to that reintroduction and continuing to really push for that advocacy. So this is a kind of brief summary. Again, what this legislation would do: reinforce protections for migratory birds by codifying these incidental take protections in the law, right? Second, it would support new investments in bird conservation and research. It would authorize fees under the law for some kind of permit or authorization, which would go to a new fund, the Migratory Bird Recovery Fund, which again, if it succeeds, could be a major new source of funding for bird conservation. So I think it's a very exciting prospect that could go along with this. Also creates a new research program for bird conservation and makes these updates to the law that would, we think, really improve it and bring it kind of up to speed with other and up to date with other environmental laws. So having an opportunity to be able to get a permit, having opportunity to have a civil penalty for incidental take, not just criminal. Again, this is a bit of a technical issue when it comes to criminal and civil law, but this right now, any penalty is considered a criminal violation, which could result in jail time. And we think for incidental take, this is a fair and actually better way to have this option available to the Fish and Wildlife Service. So again, this is about creating some like a balanced approach, some reforms here that we think ultimately this will be very beneficial to bird conservation and to the MBTA going forward. So again, just a couple of notes as a kind of a call to action, mail in terms of Jesse, but you know, for folks that are interested, we really just, you know, encourage and keep an eye out for Maine Audubon's communications on this too, but it's encouraging just people to raise their voices on this issue, raise their voices for birds, raise their voices for the MBTA. You know, this is ultimately going to, if we're going to succeed in this effort, people need to be able to speak up and let their congressmen, elected officials know that this matters to you all, right? So this needs to get on the radar of members of Congress by writing, calling, you know, in person, just letting them know that this matters to you. This is ultimately how we're going to be able to win on this issue, and then just building for broader public awareness, right? Getting this out there in your local papers, you know, raising this issue at events. You need to just build some momentum up to be able to again cut through, especially with so much going on these days, to be able to make sure that this issue doesn't get lost and just kind of swept under the rug, right? So really important for folks that you know, care about birds, care about their protections, to be able to lift up this issue at this time, especially as we see some of these potentially other things coming down the pike, like this legislation being introduced, possibly some new tax and law. So with that, I will pause it there and maybe turn to Jesse if you want to just add a little bit more color if you have anything. Otherwise, you know, we can leave some room for questions and answers as well.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. That was very thoroughly done as well. I'm just going to add two points real quickly, and definitely leave it any time for questions, and Nick as well. So first off, I just want to thank Nick as well too, as like I've come into this partnership with him recently, and it has been amazing to work with Maine Audubon. I'm fairly new birder, and once I came to Audubon, I was like, what are all these other Audubons out there? And so, but we all work hands in hand as for that goal of trying to save birds and bird habitat and bird conservation. So it's been a privilege to work with him and just to be amongst with you all as well too. I am now a bird guy, and I have a love of birds. And what Eric mentioned, in this the MBTA and the protections of it, my biggest thing that I'm trying to stress for average voters, average bird lovers out there is this term I'm trying to coin is birding is economics. Birding is powerful. Like the amount of economic activity that we as a community generate, a lot of elected officials do not know that or do not put that in perspective. And the attacks on the MBTA and other bird conservation laws imperils that economics of the activity that generates from it as well too. So that's what I've been trying to stress is everyone doesn't think it's just this, you go outside and you look at birds and it's all well and good, which is nice to have, but there is so much behind that in the economic numbers of what we generate as a community as well. So that's just one item as well. Your delegation is a very important delegation. Every member of Congress is important in this Congress, but Maine has a lot of outside weight this going around. Obviously, Senator Collins is chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, which all funding runs through her. Senator King is on the Natural Resources Committee, so a lot of the bird-specific issues run through his committee. He is also an outdoorsman as well too, so has an affinity for the outdoors and birding, but we need to continue to reiterate that as well. And then Cheryl Pingree is also on the Appropriations Committee, on the subcommittee that runs through our issues run through her. So also very vital, even though she's in the minority It is still the margins are so thin in Congress right now that every member of Congress matters even more so than recent times. And then Congressman Golden, who serves on the Natural Resources Committee as well, which the MBTA is under that jurisdiction as well too. He is a member of Congress that, yeah, he walks his own path, but we have to educate him on the importance of securing the MBTA and securing bird conservation. And so it's like we need to continue to make our voices heard. As I say, as Nick said, I'm here in DC. Most of these members of Congress could care less what I say. They care about what you have to say. So writing in, calling in, emailing in, showing up at their public events, those are all vitally important to making sure that we get our message across as well. So those are the only items that I wanted to just add on to Erik's work as well too. And just again, I just want to thank you all for just being participating in this for one, and then please stay in close communications with Nick as again he works to try to help us effectuate this change, this hard change that's happening, and the protections that we need to protect here in DC as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jesse and Erik. This is vital work. And part of the thing about strong environmental laws is that it's sort of easy not to see how important they are, right? You don't notice how bad the air is because of the Clean Air Act. You don't notice how bad the water is because of the Clean Water Act. Migratory Bird Protection Act is sort of the same way. It's been around for a long time, doing its job so well that you don't necessarily notice. When we go to Scarborough Marsh and see all the snowy egrets and the great egrets there, you don't necessarily say, thank goodness they're back. You know, it's been a long time. But Migratory Bird Treaty Act is a wall put up against extinction, and it has been working. And we're working to plug new holes sometimes that bust in that wall, whether it's new activities on the landscape or whatever. But the act has experience and has a proven track record of working, and so we just need to keep that going. Erik mentioned before some activism, some messages coming from Maine Audubon. When I was in DC this past week, I met with all the members of the Maine delegation to talk to them about a variety of issues that we are working on now, including Migratory Bird Protection Act and protection for migratory birds. You will be hearing from Maine Audubon later in April as we gear up to garner support for the Migratory Bird Protection Act. To be introduced by Representative Huffman in California. This is one way that we can do what Erik talked about, which is solidify protections for incidental take. I should say too, many of you know here the work that we do at Bird Safe Maine, our bird glass collision project. There is an argument to be made about incidental take and a giant glass building. If you put up a giant glass building, knowing what we know now about those impacts, is that incidental take? That's a question for the law. I think you can make a strong argument. And so that type of activity and that type of the use of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act really helps us out there. So stay tuned for that. That is coming. We are encouraging our representatives to join that. Shelley Pingree has been a co-sponsor in previous Congresses. And we would love a bill to be introduced in the Senate, and we're working on that. So one question here is this being recorded? This is being recorded. I have sent these all out before, and I will send it out to all the registrants of this thing. We have a question from Juanita here. If local chapters wanted to write an article about it, are there photos of like it was that we could use the information? Yeah, photos. Erik, do you know about, does National Audubon have sort of a database of bad photos that could be used?
You know, there are some. I tend to look on, there's some various public databases. So some of the Fish and Wildlife Service photos can be used as sort of public domain. So that can be one source. And they have some photos of like impacts, some historical stuff too. And then there's the Creative Commons databases for photos, which I also use. You can look on Flickr and search by that. And so you can also find some of the federal agency photos that way, but also just other individuals who are offering those up. So those are the places I tend to use, like some of these slides in this presentation. And would encourage folks to check out some of those sources.
Thank you. Erik, I'm wondering if you could maybe able to go back to the slide. So National Audubon recently, partnered with others to release the State of the Birds report. And I'm wondering if you could sort of, we could take a moment to look. Yeah, here we go. I don't know if maybe you wanted to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing in terms of specific species decline. In Maine, we have many of these, but you can see shorebirds, eastern forest birds, sea ducks, water birds, dabbling ducks are all species we have in Maine. Some grassland birds, but not as much as other parts of the country. So, any other sort of general discussion here about the State of the Birds report?
Yeah, I would say, certainly, right, thinking about Maine, right, eastern forest birds kind of as one of those big blocks there, but also, as I said, sea ducks, shorebirds. I think generally, right, when you look at this, we think about kind of songbirds and shorebirds as being these particularly vulnerable groups generally. Birds that migrate long distances, we've found patterns of, ones that are going all the way down to right South America, Central America. Because it's not just what's happening in the United States, it's what's happening on the migratory pathways and their wintering grounds. So they're kind of getting hit from multiple areas. And then generally too, I think, right, birds that have very specific niches for habitat needs, food, things like that. Those are particularly at risk. So when you start to dive in, there's particular issues that need to be identified, and there's work being done very kind of a species by species level, but you can start to see these patterns emerging. And you look at the top of this chart, right? Ducks are at the top. We've seen some slides, you can start to see actually some decline recently, and a lot of that can be with drought and other things like that. But the general pattern had been a increasing one. And, part of that is, I think, right, because of policy measures. There had been a very concerted effort to invest in wetland conservation, invest in waterfowl conservation. There's very strong interest in interest groups in working on wetland conservation, something we all do, right, too. But the investments from federal policy, things like NACA, North American Wetland Conservation Act, fees from the Pitt and Robertson Labs, Farm Bill, lots of this work, it does pay off, right? And so one of the lessons here too is that we know that conservation works when you invest in it. When you have the investments in conservation and the protections in the law, we can recover bird populations, right? And so there's no reason, and we know what the reasons are, but there's a reason that these lines can't reverse, right? We can bend the bird curve, as we like to say recently, because these birds just unfortunately are not getting the same investments, not getting the same attention, but that can change. That can change if enough people start to weigh in, start to make noise, and we make sure again that we have better protections in place, more conservation investments. And we have a challenges ahead of us because of the dynamics in the federal government, but that doesn't mean it can change. They've overcome challenges before, and we can make a real difference and start to turn these things around.
Incredibly important. Jesse, go ahead.
You're gonna jump in real quickly as well.
Of course. Of course.
And with this, I'm gonna add another stat in there. The Fish and Wildlife Service, the recent survey about 96 million bird enthusiasts in the country. It is outnumbering our hunters and anglers, but we are part of that community as well too. Like, let people know is like, yes, we are a recreational community. Yes, they're hunting the waterfowl, but we're in the same spaces roughly as well too. And so galvanizing ourselves as a broader community, not just again the hunting and fishing community as well, but like that is all of us, is like we all love birds. We just love them in a different way. And so like galvanizing that number for us to show is like we need to make sure not just our watering birds, not just our waterfowl get that resource consistently every year, every Congress. It needs to be uplifted for all of our bird species as well. So just want to just continue to reiterate that, okay, we're not, it's like we don't need to be pitting ourselves against our hunting and angling community. Like we're all one in that one space. We all love birds. We love them in a different way, and show that effort to moving us forward.
Amen. You know, and I think even from when I started birding, the connections between birders and the hunters and angler community is stronger than ever. We are working in Maine. Maine Audubon has worked for over 100 years with hunters and anglers in Maine to you know, permit the activities that folks want, but make sure that it's done safely. We partner with them on lead-free tackle. We have growing programs about lead-free ammunition. We are working to bridge this gap because, as Jesse said, we are all on the same page and we all need to work together, or else we're all going to lose things. And so that's really what the Migratory Bird Treaty Act is here for. And with that, it's 1 p.m. and I have to be respectful of folks' time. Erik and Jesse both have a lot of work to do. There's a lot happening in their worlds, and I want to thank them so much for taking the time to join us today to talk about this very important work. Jesse, thank you. Erik, thank you very much. Stay tuned, please, for more information from National Audubon as they move forward with their work, and from Maine Audubon, and we're going to connect and protect birds together. Thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you. Really appreciate it, Nick.
Thank you.